God is dead. You've probably come across these words before. The death of God has been parroted so often that it is starting to lose its meaning. A concern that I had when making this essay was whether it was worth writing about a topic that had been beaten to death. After some reflection, I still thought it was worth writing my own essay since someone out there might find it helpful. This piece serves as a prologue for a series of essays on Nietzsche's book, The Gay Science. We must first understand our existential predicament if we are to have a chance at overcoming it. The death of God is not an end, but a new beginning. When referring to the death of God, it has become common practice to exclusively refer to the famous parable of the madman. However, it is essential to consider other passages on the death of God to understand Nietzsche's perspective on this idea. In his book The Gay Science, he first mentions the death of God in a section titled New Struggles. Nietzsche described how after the Buddha died, his image was imprinted in a cave and lingered for centuries. He then states that God is dead, but like the remnant image of the Buddha, the shadow of God still lingers in the world of man. Although he was referring to the Christian God, the death of God can be more broadly understood as the decline in belief of the absolute moral validity and psychological significance of religion. Some worshippers may take offense to such an idea. They may point to the countless churches and believers as evidence to the contrary. Does the continued existence of religious institutions refute Nietzsche's observation of God's death? No, he did not assert the death of organized religion. His observation was that even within an apparently religious society, there has been a crucial decline in the authority and spiritual significance of the Christian God. All that remains is a mere shadow of this former deity. Nietzsche ends this section by asserting that we still have to vanquish his shadow too. True to his word, he would continue to relentlessly criticize Christianity throughout his productive years. The theologians may try to resuscitate God by redefining him as the ultimate good, or the ground of being, whatever the hell that means. They may deceive themselves into thinking that God is reborn, but this metaphorical God of theirs is merely a shadow. Perhaps they should have listened to Jesus when he said not to pour new wine into old wineskins. We cannot overcome nihilism by regression to religious dogma. That is merely running away from our existential predicament. The death of God is not a true loss. It is the price of our freedom. After setting the task of vanquishing the shadow of God at the start of Book 3 of The Gay Science, Nietzsche has an aphorism immediately preceding the well-known parable of the madman entitled In the Horizon of the Infinite. In this passage, he describes setting off on a voyage into a boundless ocean. With the death of God, we've burnt the bridges that once connected us to our old beliefs and way of life. We now embark on a journey towards unknown seas. Despite the dangers of raging waters, there will also be moments of beauty and tranquility. This spirit of adventure is a recurring motif in Nietzsche's works. Too often, the Nietzsche content that proliferates online overemphasizes the morbid or macho aspects of his ideas. By fixating on what is edgy, people miss out on the joyous elements of his philosophy. This abundance of spirit is what puts the gay in Gay Science. It is with this feeling of exuberance that we proceed to set sail. On this voyage, there may be times you feel homesick and wish to return to your homeland. However, if you turn back, you will find that it is no longer there. The only path that remains is forward. We now arrive at the parable of the madman, one of Nietzsche's most infamous passages. There was once a madman who entered the marketplace in the morning and repeatedly cried out, "I seek God." He attracted the attention of the locals and provoked both laughter and curiosity. The madman leapt towards them and asked, "Whither is God?" He continued by saying, "I will tell you. We have killed him. You and I. All of us are his murderers." Through the words of the madman, Nietzsche is conveying how the Western world has lost conviction in their worship of the Christian God. In the past, religious institutions were dominant in their claim of the truth. With the advancements of science and the modernization of society, the authority of religion began to decline. And thus, God is dead. Not with a bang, but a whimper. The madman pointed out how mankind hadn't even noticed his burial and decay. What is the consequence of this act of murder? The madman described how we have untethered ourselves from the cosmos and are plummeting into the chaos of the void. Nietzsche was prophetic in his observation that we are confronted with the problem of nihilism. I believe that this crisis has never been greater than it is today. The madman proclaimed, "God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him." The madman presents us with many difficult questions. How do we even respond to such a momentous event? How are we to reconcile ourselves with this earth-shattering act of deicide? After such annihilation, is it even possible to create a new way of life? For thousands of years, religion had been the bedrock of society, but this foundation is collapsing rapidly. This reality is all too apparent in the modern day. With the decline of religion, I see economic and political powers taking its place, but we cannot rely on them for meaning or fulfillment. Much like organized religion, these entities are prone to corruption, and if we allow them free rein, we will inevitably fall into a dystopia. It is our responsibility to create our own path in life, but this is easier said than done. The madman asked, "Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become God simply to appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us, for the sake of this deed, he will belong to a higher history than all history hitherto." Just as God was said to have created the universe out of nothingness, we must create meaning out of the void of nihilism. Perhaps we were made in his image after all. If we are to overcome nihilism, we ought to heed the words of the serpent of Genesis who said unto Eve, "You shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." To allow any person or institution to have exclusive rights to define morality will certainly lead us to authoritarianism. We must weigh the scales of good and evil for ourselves. Such ideas fell upon deaf ears in Nietzsche's time, just as they did for the madman. After the madman's speech, his spectators were at a loss for words. The madman stated that he had come too early and the consequences of God's death were yet to be felt. While the spectators and Nietzsche's contemporaries were able to live without feeling its impact, we today do not have that luxury. The responsibility to create meaning for our existence lies in our own hands. The Madman is one of Nietzsche's most misinterpreted passages. It needs to be understood in context with the rest of the gay science, not to mention his other works. Too often, Nietzsche's philosophy has been ripped out of context and misappropriated to fit the speaker's agenda. Even the theologians project their own despair into these words and misuse his ideas to instill a fear of a godless world to gaslight their listeners into returning to religion. It must be made clear that the words of the madman are dramatized and do not fully characterize Nietzsche's perspective on the matter. While Nietzsche surely put elements of himself into the madman, such as their prophetic insight into the death of God, there is more to Nietzsche's attitude to this event than just this passage. The parable of the madman shows that Nietzsche fully recognized the significance of the death of God and the looming specter of nihilism. Despite all the dread expressed by the madman, even he knew better than to return to Christianity and concluded, "What after all are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God? By killing God, have we opened Pandora's box? Perhaps so, but where some only see the dangers of nihilism and wish to turn back, there are those who see something beyond this suffering. Maybe they even dare to hope." Beyond the ruins of religion, Nietzsche saw potential in mankind. While he certainly doubted the worth of the masses, he conceived of a future in which we could cultivate even greater individuals who would possess power and autonomy. To create such a future, we must overcome ourselves. What is most important is that we move forward in this godless world without giving in to fear. Such a task is not meant for everyone. Nietzsche's philosophy is for the fearless. Nietzsche references the death of God again in the beginning of Book 5 of The Gay Science, published in an updated version years later. This passage, entitled "The Meaning of Our Cheerfulness," is crucial for understanding Nietzsche's perspective on this matter. The death of God is, as Nietzsche describes, the belief in the Christian God has become unbelievable. Nietzsche felt that the consequences of this monumental event were beginning to come into fruition in the Western world. In our own time, we are seeing its impact come in full force. Furthermore, Nietzsche's insights on nihilism are not limited to Christianity and Europe. We can see the consequences of the collapse in traditional beliefs across the rest of the world. The full impact of the death of God, understood in a broader sense, remains to be seen. Nietzsche noted that although a perceptive few may sense something changing and view it with suspicion, they too are far from understanding the true ramifications of the death of God. Religion has been foundational to our culture, so we should not underestimate the consequences of its decline. Nietzsche observed that with the collapse of Christianity, much of Western culture that was built upon this faith has been undermined. He foresaw decadence and destruction as a result of nihilism. You would expect a person to respond with fear and despair to such a calamitous future. Such an attitude is understandable, and many of us today are responding to our seemingly hopeless situation by resigning ourselves to despondency and escapism motivated by cowardice. When we are overwhelmed by adversity, there's a temptation to fall into an attitude of defeatism. However, if we muster our courage and look to the future with eyes unclouded by fear, we can go beyond despair. Nietzsche writes, "Why is it that we look forward to the approaching gloom without any real sense of involvement and above all, without any worry and fear for ourselves?" Despite the inevitable strife that lies beyond, Nietzsche did not dread the future. He describes his impression of the initial consequences of the death of God. They are not at all sad and gloomy, but rather like a new and scarcely describable kind of light, happiness, relief, exhilaration, encouragement, dawn. Such a defiant sense of hope seems inconceivable after hearing the cries of the madman. Did Nietzsche just possess a superhuman immunity to pain and strife? No, it is clear from his life and works that Nietzsche suffered deeply. He endured endless physical ailments and experienced immense alienation. What sets him apart is that he had the strength of character to affirm all these terrible experiences and overcome his suffering. Nietzsche had an acute understanding of the consequences of the death of God and fully experienced the crisis of nihilism within himself. Through overcoming himself, he gained the power to confront this tragic situation and say yes to life. Beyond the chaos of existence, Nietzsche saw an open sea and a new dawn. If we are to create a new way of life, we must encounter new ideas and experiences. We must embark on an odyssey of the mind. As we set sail, we look onwards into the unknown. Now that the skies have cleared, we see what lies beyond. An infinite horizon.